I was asked to talk about EPA's perspectives on water quality trading, and really our perspective is to ensure that your state's trading program has continuity with the Clean Water Act, and in this particular case, continuity with the TMDL, Chesapeake Bay TMDL, and the underlying science. That's really our role, and I wanted to go over 7 or 8 components of what we've communicated to the states, including Maryland, through what we call technical memos. They're just memos. But they're publicly available. They've been through a process of vetting feedback and so forth, both from the states and other broad stakeholders through the Chesapeake Bay Partnership Committee process. So starting out, I just wanted to say that we've both recognized and allowed water quality trading for 20 years. And what that really means for you is you really are at the beginning. Take it easy. This is all new for you, but we've been doing this for quite some time. Area emissions trading, 25 years, wetland mitigations trading, decades. So you're at the beginning, and that's a good place to start, typically so. Would you not agree? First is the enforcement. The enforcement process, water quality trading, is exactly what it's been the last 40 years under the Clean Water Act. That is to say, through the permit process, if you're found to not meet your permit, there's an enforcement mechanism there. That does not change with water quality trading. There's a liability issue of whether or not the seller is responsible, and the answer is no. If the seller does not uphold their end, under the Clean Water Act, for a non-point source seller, like a row crop farmer, we have no authority there. We never had the authority. We don't have it now, and we don't gain it through trading. So the enforcement process is always through that permit, same as it's been in the last 40 years, enforceable by penalty and so forth. Baseline, really important to uphold in this case, the science of the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. If you're a seller over here and you're a buyer on this side, the buyer needs to go from where they are down to this level. And if the seller only goes from here down, the math doesn't add up. So what the baseline requires is that the seller has to first meet their baseline, which we've already talked about, and then go further below. And that's a requirement to uphold really the science of the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. If you don't do that, the math just doesn't work out, okay? A couple caveats to that, not caveats, but a couple points. Trading does not change your baseline, very important. There's no authority, certainly at the federal level, to say, well, you bought some credits, you sold some credits, we can see that, so we're going to tighten down on you. That's not how it works. We're very clear in our expectations that first the state sets the goals, then you trade, not the other way around. Local water quality, again, this has already been touched upon, but we're very clear in a technical memo, and part of the title is local water quality. I can't remember the full title. But we're actually the only folks I'm aware of, even at other state levels across the country, we make it very clear that there can be a geographic constraint on where you can trade. And that is to say, if there's a local impairment, a local issue, if you will, with nitrogen, phosphorus, or sediment that's occurring locally, although you may want to buy credits as they impact the Chesapeake Bay, you would have to limit where the seller and the buyer is to that local segment, that local stream, what have you, so as to uphold that portion of the Clean Water Act, the part of the Clean Water Act that's concerned about that local water quality. So we make that very clear, and it's not often said, but you can still trade, but it becomes geographically constrained. In that example, be wary of the fact that nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment is not always a local issue, however. A lot of educational effort's been made to enlighten us as to the harmful aspects, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily impacting your local waters. But where it is, we're very clear that there has to be a constraint. Flip the page here. Verification, certification, that's been talked about. The main point is that a permit under the Clean Water Act is by definition a public document. And so if you read our memo on verification certification, what it's really saying is all of the information that underlies that non-point source credit, the certification, verification, the observations, the calculations, it equally has to be made publicly available, okay? It's in keeping, again, the continuity of water quality trading with the Clean Water Act. That's something I don't think is an issue here in Maryland, just by the way, and most states settle on that reality. But that's what we're trying to do there, is to keep that information equally available as the underlying permit itself, again, the continuity there. Enforcement, I've already talked about that, but I want to just emphasize, just again, that where we do not have enforcement on non-point sources, we continue to not have an enforcement, so don't make that sort of mistake, or don't let that fear enter your mind. The enforcement is instead through the regulated point source. Non-point source credit quantification, that is to say, who determines how many pounds that practice is worth? What we're going to do, or what we've said to the states, is you can, and you in fact probably should, where it makes sense, use your own credit calculation tools at that field level. Rich talked about field level versus large scale. Chesapeake Bay is large scale, but we understand the need for local scale. You can use those tools. Maryland plans to use such a tool. What we're going to be doing is looking at those practices at the larger basin level. We're going to be using the exact same science that is in the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, the exact same models, and we're going to be communicating to the state at the basin level whether cumulatively those credits, as they calculate it, are diverting from the credits as we calculate. So again, continuity with the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. Our oversight role will be at that basin level. We're not going to meddle with the field level, but we're going to keep that continuity, again, with the absolute same science. That brings up the issue of non-point source uncertainty. So if it's EPA's perspective that our oversight role will use the same science in the TMDL, why would you need to discount a non-point source credit if it's, in our eyes, will be assessed at the same, with the same science? And the reason is not because of the Chesapeake Bay. The Chesapeake Bay is, again, large scale. The reason is because of the permitted buyer. So we're obligated to not only, we have the full faith in the science at the basin level in terms of the TMDL, but for that particular permit with a particular pipe that's particularly measured, can you really argue that the non-point source credit is equally knowable? And we feel the answer is no, and so we require some discounting of that credit. But that said, we had another little caveat that we don't often see in most states, which is if you can measure more directly that non-point source reduction, you can reduce that discount, or you can get rid of that ratio. So at least at the federal level, we've recognized that, and we give an incentive or a hint to the states to maybe figure out a way to reward folks for maybe taking the extra step to measure some of those reductions and reduce that uncertainty. And that's, again, in keeping with the base science, which at its heart goes back to measured observations, which are then modeled and extrapolated true, but it all goes back to a measured observation. And then lastly, just interstate trading. We haven't mentioned that. Maybe I shouldn't because it makes you nervous. I don't know. But the key thing here is from EPA's perspective, right? That's what I'm representing today. We see no inherent barriers to that interstate trading. We certainly know that pollution crosses state lines. And basically everything I've said and other communications we've had at the operational level about water quality trading would apply to interstate trading. So I'm not advocating anything, and I'm not even advocating water quality trading, let alone interstate trading. But just so you understand, it's certainly something that's doable and feasible, but all the same sort of caveats, limitations, or even constraints at times would apply. So that's our perspective, keeping the continuity of your state's program with the Clean Water Act and the TMDL. So I think, should we? Yeah, that's it.